All right, hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our TLB Club monthly live stream. And my name is Bobby Umar. If you don't know who I am, I'm a motivational speaker who's done 1,000 keynotes and workshops across 4 continents over the last 20 years, mostly speaking about leadership, thought leadership, personal branding, and vulnerable storytelling. I'm also the founder of TLB Club, which is a membership community for small business owners. I'm also a 5-time TEDx speaker and a 3-time TEDx invite decliner. So that's a bit about me. And we do a monthly live stream where we take on topics around thought leadership, around topics that are of interest to me in terms of advocacy, leadership, personal branding, and trying to create the impact in the world. And today, because it is Pride Month, we're going to talk about why Pride matters and how to take action. I've brought in, I'd asked actually, we had 3 people signed up to do 3 activists in the Pride community, and we're going to talk, but one of them is called in sick. So Claude Silver, we're thinking about you, sending you lots of love. Hope you feel better. And I'm very excited to have 2 other amazing activists in the space. And actually, I'm going to start with just introductions because I'd love for you to tell people a bit about and a little bit more of a longer introduction. Tell us a bit about who you are and kind of a little bit about your story, and then how you became involved in being a leader and activist in the space. And of course, everyone who's listening in, if you're listening in, we love comments. So make sure you comment, share where you're calling in from: North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia. Let us know where you are. And then if you have questions for the panel, please do. We'd love to have your questions and be part of the conversation. All right, so I'm going to start with you, Charlotte. Go ahead, and then we'll pass on to Nate.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here with you both for what's been, I would say, an historic Pride Month in good ways and bad ways. My name is Charlotte Clymer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a writer, activist, communications consultant, and military veteran. I have been doing advocacy for, gosh, well over a decade. Um, I am particularly focused on the intersection between mass communications and gender equality. Gender equality as far as trans rights goes, as far as healthcare goes, gender equity as well. These are all intersecting issues and overlapping issues, and so it's quite important that we recognize, I think, the the community challenges faced by so many different vulnerable groups when it comes to kind of changing the system over time. I think top of mind for me lately has been the trans military ban, the fact that thousands of trans service members were kicked out this month, and certainly the recent Supreme Court ruling on gender affirming care for trans youth, which was handed down this week and is rather terrible. So I'm really excited to have a nuanced conversation today, and thank you for inviting me, Bobby.
Thank you. Nate, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is, I'm so excited to be having this conversation, so thank you as well. My name is Nate Shalev. My pronouns are they, them. I am based in New York with my wife and our beagle named Joan Jett. It's been a particularly rainy June in New York, and so it is currently very gray outside my window. I run my own inclusion consulting business. It's called Rebel Impact. I focus on leadership development and employee engagement, author and inclusion belonging lens. Specifically, I focus a lot around LGBTQ and trans inclusion, disability inclusion, thinking about neurodivergence, and talking a lot about also Jewish inclusion and anti-Semitism. I similarly that you mentioned changing the system over time, Charlotte, and I really like that. I really like to focus on where folks have their own spheres of influence and how they can make change within their own communities and their own lives, and how that then can ripple out into systemic change.
Thank you. So let's get right into the topic. I mean, obviously, and I guess I'll share a bit of my own personal experience. I mean, I'm he, him. I'm an ally. I'm not, but again, I'm an ally for a lot of reasons. Very important people in my life that are important to me that I want to support, and so that's why for me it's a big thing. I've always been a big believer in equality, equity, inclusion and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it's something I've learned over, I guess, 20, 30 years of being in a diverse life. That's why it's a big part of it for myself. And I will say that what they didn't say is that Charlotte I've known for years on Twitter, but now she's on other platforms. I see her there too. She's one of my favorite activists out there. I love how she thinks. I love what she says. I love how she says it. And almost every sort of challenging issue out there that affects people in the queer community, I often will read her take, and it gives me a lot of comfort and a lot of advice and wisdom that I follow. So I mean that, and the biggest compliment I can give you.
Thank
So
you.
that I've known you for a long time. And Nate is a LinkedIn top voice as well, and has done a ton of amazing advocacy for the queer community. This is our first time meeting in person, but I know we've had lots of messages going back and forth, and I have looked at your content. It is phenomenal stuff. So I do really love what you're doing too. So thank you for that. Let's talk a bit about, starting with why does pride matter? And so maybe Nate, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Charlotte.
Yeah, I can talk about it from the two ways, both I would say like the personal and when we're thinking about our workplaces, they intertwine. When I'm thinking generally about pride and the role it kind of shows up in my life, there's something about it being able to sustain you through the rest of the year. So we've got this 1 month, we're able to focus on our histories, our communities, our events, and you can just breathe a little bit easier in certain spaces. And so it can sustain you throughout the year when you don't have pride. And so personally, I think it takes up that role in my life. And when we're thinking about our workplaces, we know that inclusion initiatives create better workplaces. They're more productive, more innovative. Generally, inclusion initiatives benefit us all, and being able to specifically focus on the needs of LGBTQ communities, being able to talk about what it means to be queer at work and how we can support that. We're able to create these better workplaces for us all, but then specifically create spaces where our queer and trans folks can show up and be able to do our best work, because we don't have to we're not the only ones navigating all of the, when we're trying to navigate, right, different kinds of biases and discrimination at work, it can be a really heavy and time-consuming and energy-consuming burden. And so at least during Pride Month, we're able to talk about it openly and have a lot of these conversations that we don't get to have throughout the year.
Charlotte, what about you? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, Pride Month, the cliche at this point, and I worry sometimes it's kind of losing its power, but Pride was originally a protest. It was not I would say, a fun thing. It originally started as an act of desperation against authorities that were irrationally and cruelly oppressing LGBTQ people in New York, and then it grew from there. And I think what's interesting to me over the past decade has been watching as there's been, I would say, a vigorous debate over what pride should mean and how it's applied every June. I think 6 or 7 years ago, when I first started working at the Human Rights Campaign, there was, I think, significant controversy over what companies were allowed to celebrate Pride, what Pride celebrations were allowed to be sponsored by what corporations. And I think in having those conversations, there were a lot of people in the queer community who felt that, for example, why would we have Bank of America sponsor DC Pride if they have practices that hurt, really all consumers, but specifically queer people in certain ways. And, these conversations are important to have, but I also think that, and I thought that back then, I think that certainly now, is that there has to be, I think, a pathway for grace with each other in not only discussing what pride should mean, but also not gatekeeping on who can celebrate pride, and not allowing for a pathway for evolving over time, for not just people, but companies, organizations, colleges, etc. If we always had some kind of strict rubric on who can host a Pride celebration or who can sponsor a Pride celebration, I'm not sure anybody would meet those extremely high standards. And what we've seen now is that with the federal government viciously attacking LGBTQ people across the board, and specifically trans folks, the one remaining pillar in the public square these days are companies. You see that alongside companies like I would say Target, which really retreated from the public square when it comes to advancing LGBTQ rights. When you look at certain corporations who have pulled out of Pride Month, we've also seen companies that have stood their ground very firmly. I was really taken aback by oh goodness gracious, what was the Costco being upfront and loud about their support for DEI policies and specifically LGBTQ rights. It's really important, I think, that when all is said and done, that we look at this moment as, I hope, a lesson to be learned, and that we should not be so purist. We should not be so judgy toward each other. We should not demand perfection from each other when it comes to celebrating Pride, and really gathering imperfect allies across all walks of life and trying to build a bigger tent and advance civil rights overall. So that's my hope, but we're going to have hard conversations to get to that place.
Speaking of hard conversations, and I'll kind of give my take on this, but because I see all the comments, and some of the comments aren't necessarily positive. And so what I'm going to say is, I'm going to say why Pride matters. I'm going to talk to the people who are saying things like, there are people who say things like, all lives matter or white lives matter. They say, when is straight month and things like that. The truth is that there are many marginalized communities out there, right? The queer community, trans people, Black, brown, indigenous people, women, and there's a lot of challenge with that. And so the truth is, it's important for us to create a space where people feel safe, feel heard, feel included, and it's important for us to practice empathy for those people. And that's why we have these months and these events, so that people in those different marginalized groups feel safe. Anybody who's not in a marginalized group, essentially white cis hetero men, for the most part, and straight, for the most part, like this is not about you. We're trying to have empathy for the people who are struggling, and lives are being lost and people's lives are being impacted, and that's why we do that. We care for those in the queer community, the indigenous community, the Black community, the brown community, who are struggling. And that's, for me, it's a question of empathy. Like, the reason why we have Pride Month and Pride Day or Pride parades is because we're trying to let people know that we have to have empathy, and empathy starts by understanding how they're feeling. Empathy starts with understanding why they feel that way, and most importantly, is there a way for us to support those feelings, which is kind of where the take action piece comes into play. So, that to me is something that I think is important. So, I guess I want to get right into there's clearly one person who's commenting a lot, and they talk about the whole idea about why isn't there straight month? I mean, how would you address that, or do we not take the time to address that because it's not worth the time to address it? I'm just being really honest. I'm not sure what the right answer is. Nate, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say generally with this, there's also no one right answer. And so whenever we're talking about inclusion, I always say, like, no matter where you are, it's okay. And, like, let's talk about it. And so these spaces are exactly the space where we should be talking about it, where folks should be able to come with whatever questions they have and not feel like they need the exact right language. And often folks with LGBTQ communities get bogged down in either not knowing the letters or the terms. And so I really try to encourage folks as much as they can when we're having these conversations to quiet that voice a little bit, and whatever language you have is the exact right language you need, and we will work from there. So just to say, like, I don't think there's one right answer. Thinking about why Straight Pride Month and empathy, I think empathy is really hard. I think taking somebody's perspective and being able to understand it enough to let it move you to action is really difficult, because it's not when it's not our experience. And so it's helpful just to think about what that actually means. And so it can mean something in daily life, like being unsure about walking down the street and if it's safe, and everywhere you go, having to scan for safety. It can be thinking about if you're planning a trip, it can be work travel, it can be regular travel if you're just planning a vacation. For straight folks or non-LGBTQ folks, you can just plan whatever trip you want, right? You can, you've got to go to a conference, you're not going to worry about anything. You just get to book that travel. All you have to do is figure out your accommodations, you know, get a dog sitter, like whatever folks need. And when we're thinking about LGBTQ folks, we have so many lists of things. Is it, is it legal to be gay where we're going? Is it legal to be trans where we're going? What are some of the restrictions around, now that we're thinking about everything that's been going on with passports and getting accurate IDs for us? So we're thinking about our safety. We're thinking about if we're actually going to be able to get where we're going. And then once we're there, how we're going to navigate things. And this can be something like very ordinary things, like where we're going to go to the bathroom in a public place, or if our dress code is going to be able to be aligned with whatever is happening here, or is there going to be a stigma as soon as we walk in the room? And so those kinds of things, I think, happen, I would say, like in many different aspects and many different parts of our lives. And it could be when we're thinking about our workplace or just our daily lives. And so the idea of why not a straight month, right, is exactly that, because folks don't have to think about all of these other things, because every single month, right, we can celebrate, I want to say like straight histories, right, because I don't want to create this dichotomy, but queer histories are the ones that actively are being erased, and we have all these different things to navigate that other folks don't have to. So we have this 1 month where we get to elevate and highlight the specific issues that are affecting our lives.
Charlotte, what do you think?
Yeah, no, Nate made so many great points just now. Well, let's start here. I think that what people tend to forget, and perhaps this is an unintended consequence of having the sort of corporate pride framework. Not saying I'm opposed to the corporate pride framework, but here's an unintended consequence of it, is that we tend to lose sight of the current status of LGBTQ rights in this country, because not enough attention is drawn to the actual hardcore status of rights. So in 29 states right now, LGBTQ people do not have protection from discrimination in housing, credit, public accommodations, jury service, education. I mean, this means that, if I start driving from, the northeast of the United States, northeast region, all the way down to Southern California, so just do a cross-country drive, the rights to which I am entitled as an LGBTQ person, and certainly as a trans person, will change depending on the city, county, and state through which I'm driving in any given moment. Now, if Secretary Pete Buttigieg and his husband Chasten and their 2 kids were to go down to my home state of Texas and try to buy a house, and the property owner said, I don't want to sell my house to you because you're gay, I mean, there's no protection against that. There's no active legal recourse against that. Now, he could sue, he could, take a gamble on what the courts would do, but that is the state of LGBTQ rights. I think back when Obergefell came down, there was a spirited conversation among a lot of queer activists that, yes, this is a good thing, but it would also lead to complacency with LGBTQ rights overall. And I think that's borne out to be quite true, because, for all the support that LGBTQ people have in this country culturally, we do not have that support legally. That is just the fact. The only 2 protections that LGBTQ people have at the federal level are, 1, marriage equality through Obergefell from the Supreme Court, and 2, from Bostock, employment protections. So we can't be fired for being LGBTQ, we can't be denied employment for being LGBTQ, and we can't be denied the covenants and rights of a marriage because we're LGBTQ. But that's it. That's all there is. We're not protected from discrimination in housing federally. We're not protected from discrimination in credit. We're not protected from discrimination in education. You know, all these things, areas of the public square that dominate the vast majority of our day-to-day lives, we do not have protection against discrimination. And that is specifically because there is a lack of legal protections at the federal level that makes sense. You know, and we could really get into the weeds here about, you know, classes of protection and strict scrutiny versus intermediate scrutiny and how that ties back into sex as a classification. And I'm not going to get into all that. But the fact is that in our day-to-day lives, we are treated like second-class citizens still. It doesn't feel that way because you turn on the TV and you see a queer person in a movie or a television show, or, you know, you see a reporter or a news anchor that's openly gay, and we think, oh, well, they wouldn't let someone on TV if they didn't have equal rights, right?
Right.
But that's not true. That's just not true. And so I think that we are in a long process of trying to reckon the country with how they perceive rights versus what those rights actually exist as in this nation. And, you know, to the question of, you know, should we have Pride Month versus should we have Straight Month? Listen, baby, if you want to do Straight Month, let's do it. I'm all
Right.
for it. If you want us to celebrate straight pride, let's fucking do it. I think it's great. Let's designate a month in this entire calendar year. I don't know if it's May or September, August, whatever. We'll do straight pride. I'm all for it. We will do a parade. We'll show up. We'll celebrate heterosexual relationships. I will wear a straight ally shirt on. I'll do everything that is possible to support straight people who feel they need that kind of affirmation of their relationship. If you really need that, I will be here for you, and I will support that desire because in my gut, what I feel is that this is not really about a sense of frustration with not being recognized as being straight or having straight pride. I think it's a sense of frustration in not being centered. That's what it's about. The question, when is Straight Pride Month, doesn't come from this sense of fairness. It comes from the sense of not 100% of the time being at the center of the conversation. And I'm sorry, but it's time to take a step back and ask yourself, why do I feel so threatened by the idea of spending literally 1/12 of the year, 1/12, focused on the status of LGBTQ rights in this country? So if you want to do straight pride, let's do it. But, you know, in reciprocity, I would ask that you recognize the lack of federal protections for LGBTQ people and why you're okay with that.
And one thing I will say is that I, in particular, am amazed at your responses because they're so thoughtful, they're so supportive, they're grounded, and they're inclusive. And you know, and I think that why can't everyone be that way in terms of being inclusive and supportive of everybody else, or as you said earlier, you know, giving everybody some grace. So I love that. I really do. I think what you both said was really really good. I guess the question becomes like, you know, why is it so hard? I mean, there's so much. I mean, the other thing you said was, you know, it's all about equality across the board for everybody in every aspect of their life. Just seems to be something that is a standard that I think everyone could get behind, right? I mean, and you know, and I guess the question I have is like, why is it so hard for some people to get behind that concept? Like, why is it so hard to convince them? I mean, you mentioned that, you know, some people don't like being not centered. They want to be centered. I understand that. But sometimes it feels like the empathy piece or even just the equality piece is hard to convince folks. And I'm just curious about why that is so hard to convince folks of that. And maybe Charlotte, I'll start with you and then go to Nate.
Yeah, and I won't take up too much space because I want to hear what Nate has to say about this.
Okay.
You know, right now we are in the midst of an ongoing loneliness epidemic. You know, there are tens of millions of people in this country who quite literally do not have anything in the way of a tangible support network. This, you know, having friends, family, being able to go outside of work or home and having something of a tangible community that nourishes them. There are tens of millions of people in this country who don't have that. And statistically, as it were, the vast majority of these folks are not LGBTQ. These are straight cisgender folks who I think are looking at their current situation of feeling lonely, and then they see that there are these great, grand, big celebrations for LGBTQ people, and they think, well, why don't I have that kind of community? Why can't I be part of that? They feel intimidated by it. They feel left out. I think they feel forgotten. Now, none of this is on LGBTQ people, of course. This isn't our fault. But if I'm trying to be empathetic here, if I'm trying to um, really understand where they're coming from, like this really sad account who's kind of spamming the feed right now. I mean, these are folks who in their core are just very, very lonely and insecure. And they don't know how to negotiate that. They don't know how to deal with it. And so what it becomes is this impulse to um, constantly tear down everything and everyone around them to get some semblance of attention, um, some recognition that they exist. And it's very sad. At the core of it, it's very, very sad. What I would like to see, I think, are society-wide efforts to address this loneliness epidemic, to really build community in places where people don't have it, to invite people in. And I would like to believe that, you know, our movement does a pretty good job of welcoming everybody, of ensuring that people can come into our spaces and be themselves. But it's hard. And so, you know, it's an ongoing effort that is not easy and that we need to put more attention to. And Nate, it turns out I did take up a lot of space, but I got on a roll. So I'm going to turn it over to you now.
I am really glad you got on a roll because it is an excellent role to be on. Because I think you're right. I think that there's something about this idea of like, why can't I be a part of that? And like, what does that mean for me? And I think when I'm thinking about specifically in our workplaces and how it shows up, I think it's a similar idea. And I think there's like a scarcity mindset often with some of these initiatives that says, if we're focusing on LGBTQ folks, why aren't we focusing on whatever thing is really important to me? If we're putting so much energy here, why don't I have the resources or the support that I need to do my job? Or if we are focusing on LGBTQ hiring, does that mean we're not focused on hiring for me and who I am? And you know, the job market is really tough right now. And so what does that actually mean for me? And so I think that, I think we see it in our workplaces as well. And I think it's part of why it's hard for folks to sometimes get on board with some of this, because there's, I don't want to say a misunderstanding, but maybe there's not enough context for folks, because there's this feeling of, if we're focusing on this, that means I'm going to have less. And why do LGBTQ folks, like, why are they getting special treatment? And so there's not quite the understanding of, it's not about special treatment. It's about making sure everyone specifically gets the resources and support that they need to do their jobs in the best way. And so for somebody trans who's consistently getting misgendered at work, that might mean working from home, or that might mean, you know, making sure that we have great additional training and onboarding support around trans inclusion and what that means. We're focusing on it because that's what we need to make sure that specifically folks are going to get the support that they need to be able to show up and do their very best job. And so I think emphasizing the why behind what we're doing it's not taking away from anyone else, that this is benefiting us all, and that the goal is really to make sure that our teams are working the best that they can, that our communities are as healthy as they can be, but that includes us all. And so I think that that's part of why some folks are just why it's hard to get on board, because there's not this understanding of what it actually means and why we're doing it. And without that, it can feel isolating, it can feel alienating. And so the companies that do it right, or when we're able to talk about it, I think it can be a powerful moment to be able to get everyone on board. But it's hard.
Let's talk a bit about the companies that are doing it right, because there's a lot of companies that are scaling back initiatives, and now there are. But you mentioned one that was doing a good job, so I'm curious about what your take is on that. I mean, why? I mean, I guess I think you said Costco is doing a good job of it, and if so, I mean, I guess they're not afraid of any sort of negative impact from a financial standpoint, and the other ones are worried about that. I guess I'm curious about what we can do to try to address that and try to navigate that, because I think it's a very complicated situation.
Nate, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the companies that I've seen who have been doing it right and been able to navigate this moment. And it is an understanding about why it's important and about how it is actually driving their business forward. And they know that, and they can deeply believe in that, and they understand the different things that are working well. And so now they've just been trying to figure out how to navigate this kind of current moment that we're in. And so some folks have shifted their teams, that they've absorbed their diversity and inclusion teams into another team. Some of them have changed the words that they're using. Some of them haven't been doing it publicly, but have still been making sure that these initiatives are still existing, because they know just how important it is, right? They know that, like, when they're thinking about an up-and-coming workforce, it's over 20% of Gen Z is LGBTQ. When you're thinking about folks staying, I think there's some stat, because I've been doing Pride speaking engagements, I have some of these stats. It's like 1 out of 3 LGBTQ folks might leave because of an unsupportive environment. And like, these are your best talent. And so I think that there's this idea that this is like a nice thing that we're doing for queer folks, and it's not. It's something integral that we need for the health of our teams, because LGBTQ folks are leaders. We are like the best part of your team. We are like the talent that you're really excited to keep and make sure that you are supporting. And so there's, I think that there's this feeling that it's a nice to have. So I think the companies doing it right know that, and they know that these initiatives are what's helping the companies move forward. And then the other thing just to underline is that we're focusing on LGBTQ folks, but there are the parents of LGBTQ kids, and folks have trans siblings and gay brothers and best friends and coworkers. And so we're talking about a majority of our workforce and a majority of our communities. Even though LGBTQ folks, we are a smaller percentage of the population, but there's so many folks who care about us that when you're doing these initiatives, it signals to everyone that we care about who you are. We want to make sure that you're getting the resources and support that you need, and that affects all of our teams.
I can't speak for everyone in the community, just to be clear, but I want to come to work and just be treated like everybody else. That's what I want. I want to come to work, and when I make a mistake, I want to face the same consequences. I want to be held to the same standard of excellence. I want to, of course, be rewarded in the same way for the successes I have as a professional. But really, overall, I just want to come in to work and be like everybody else. I would, if I could, trade pride for simply there being a consistent standard in the workplace for everybody, I would make that deal in a second. That would make sense to me. I think a lot of us who are LGBTQ, we don't like to stand out. We don't like to constantly, I would say, in the eyes of some, be the outlier in the workplace. As a professional, what's important to me is getting the job done, and done to a high standard. That's what's important to me. Having a rainbow banner in my office or in the lobby of the office building is not important. It's not. But the reason we have to have that kind of awareness is because we are not treated the same as everybody else. We do not have the same protections. We do not have the same access to quality health care. We do not have the same, I would say, framework of protection against discrimination in things like housing and credit and all these other areas of the public square. So the fact that we even have to have this conversation is in itself a little demoralizing. I mean, when you really drill down into it, the entire thesis of Pride is, should LGBTQ people exist? And if we should exist, should we be treated like human beings that are entitled to the same civil rights and human rights protections? We're debating our own humanity. The existence of Pride is a question of whether or not LGBTQ people should exist. So, it's a little frustrating, I think, to constantly engage with the bad faith inquiries over Pride when really it's just a question of existence. Now, if folks don't want us to exist, then they should just be upfront about that. Stop pussyfooting around it. Just at least have the courage of your convictions and say, you know what, you're right. I don't think LGBT people should exist. And the existence of LGBTQ people makes me uncomfortable. At least then we could get somewhere. At least then we could have a rational conversation and say, okay, well, why does it make you uncomfortable? Like, why does our existence somehow put you in such a strange spot? But they don't want to have that conversation. They want to move around it. They want to be oblique. And I would say, I'm looking for another word here, and it's not working because it's Sunday morning, and I'm a little, I'm still waiting for the caffeine to kick in. But they don't want to have an honest conversation about these things. So, people who criticize Costco or people who criticize John Deere or Disney or any of these companies that have stood by their LGBTQ affirming policies, they don't want to just be honest about it. Because if they were honest, they would say, you know what, this isn't actually about your policies. This is about me not wanting you to exist. And until we can have that conversation, we're not going to get anywhere overall with this topic.
Again, thanks for sharing this. And this live stream brought to you by the TLB Club. So we do a monthly live stream, and the TLB Club is a membership community for small business owners to level up their brand voice and work on not being alone and being included in a safe space to get the resources tools they want to elevate what they're doing. And this is being live streamed across a lot of platforms. Someone was asking, there's nobody commenting. Well, actually, this is being streamed across LinkedIn to my 54,000 followers, on Twitter to my 460,000 followers, to Instagram, to TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. So it is everywhere, and there are people commenting in various places. So I would encourage you to share more comments and let me know if you have any specific questions for the panel. I want to move to the taking action piece. Obviously, there's a lot of things that are going on, and I think taking action is something that a lot of people talk about it and they posture about these things, but they don't actually take action. And so I want to, let's start with the overall question of what are some of the key pieces to take action on, because sometimes I find that when there's so many things thrown at you, right, all these things, I sometimes don't even know where to start. I mean, look, I'll be full front. I'm Canadian, okay, but I watch what's happening in the U.S. and I cannot understand. Like, it's like there are 150 holes in the boat, and I don't know which one to plug first. And so I find it really, really distressing. I don't even know where to start. And so I guess I think a lot of people, when it comes to taking action, when they have so many different things to think about, it's hard to move forward on one. But I wanted to get your take on where does one start when it comes to taking action, when it comes to Pride and supporting the LGBTQ plus community.
Nate, do you want to start with that?
Yeah. I definitely can. And I also just want to acknowledge this idea of debating our humanity that you were talking about, because it's heavy. It's a lot. And so I think the first thing is also just acknowledging like what's at stake when we're talking about these conversations, and how deeply that can impact how we're just able to show up and what that actually means. And especially now, as you said, in the US, that it's constant. There's like every week there's something else, particularly around trans rights and the conversation around trans rights. And so this consistent need to debate our humanity when we are just here and we have existed and we've always existed, it can be hard. So I think the first step is also just like acknowledging that it's a lot. It's just a lot all the time. And so when I'm thinking about what to like do first, or how to make this feel approachable is the wrong word, but make it feel like you can do something. I think the first step is thinking about what you said around like what makes you uncomfortable. I think that's a good first step. So if we're talking about trans sports, is that the thing that makes you uncomfortable? Then like let's research more, like talk about that, find out exactly what the conversation is like and what we're talking about. If there are specific aspects of LGBTQ communities and every time it comes up, there's that gut feeling that you're not sure about, actively find out. Read memoirs, watch the documentaries, find the resources that are directly from the communities themselves to be able to start to fill some of the gaps in knowledge or experience, or actively practicing and building that empathy by hearing directly from folks. Creators, right? You mentioned all the platforms this has been streaming on. Right now, there's a lot of like folks that you can hear directly from about their own experience. And so I would say the first step is making sure you can get the information to fill the gaps in knowledge. When I'm thinking about our workplaces specifically, one of the top tips I give is just to assume that there's going to be an LGBTQ person in the room. We don't always know who's queer. We don't always know who's trans. We don't know who's going to show up. We can just assume that they are. Like statistically, that's most likely true. But even if it's not, right, by assuming and proactively planning for who's in the room, that's when we can start to create the policies, create some of the infrastructure that we might need. And so if you're thinking about if a trans person is filling out my form, what does that mean? Maybe that means making sure there's a space for a legal name and name. Maybe it's making sure that there's a space for pronouns. Maybe it's making sure that when they show up to our event, we know that they can show multiple forms of ID. We're training our security and registration folks to know that the ID might not match your assumptions of the person in front of you. Like we're able to think about it in a way that can feel we're able to understand maybe what needs to be done more. And so I would say always having that proactive measure first and then being prepared for what might happen. So if something LGBTQ phobic happens, what am I going to do? Having a few go-to phrases can be helpful. Thinking about it beforehand, if there's some safety measures that we need to put in place, and making sure everyone's aware of them. And so those are some of the things that I think can help us start to take action. The first is focusing on us and who we are at the very first step, to figure out what we need to do as allies, understand where those gaps in knowledge are, so we're not perpetuating any harm, that we already know what's going on. And then the second step, I think, is around being proactive.
That's well said, Nate. Really well said. For me, what it comes down to is the necessity to have good faith conversations. There's a difference between good faith and bad faith. Bad faith is when you ask a question that is intentionally meant to be provocative, demeaning, trolling, right? You're not really looking to talk about these things. You're looking to be incendiary, inflammatory, what have you, which doesn't do much of anything. It makes you feel good, I'm sure, for the troll asking that question. It makes them feel pretty good, but it doesn't accomplish anything. A good faith conversation, and I love these, is when a social conservative, and I've had many conversations with social conservatives in this vein, who will ask me very directly, what does it mean to be trans? And, where does that come from? And, how does that manifest in day-to-day life? Why should I, as a non-trans person, be expected to validate a trans person? But when that's asked in good faith, that leads to an informed, nuanced conversation in which people feel comfortable to unpack their own discomfort in a smart way, in a savvy way, in an empathetic way. And I think there are spaces for those conversations, but there has to be some kind of good faith intention. I a couple years ago, I was on a business trip, staying at a hotel late at night. I went downstairs to the front desk to get some late night snacks because I was working. And there was a married couple there who were on vacation. And we were waiting for the front desk person to get back because they had taken a short break. And we got to talking. And, it was quite clear that, this married couple was from a more conservative background. And, obviously they kind of, read me as trans and probably progressive. But we had a really good conversation because they told me they'd voted for Trump, and that they were wondering, what's the big deal here? Why are LGBTQ people so afraid of Trump? And I started calmly talking to them about the actual threats to our civil rights, but also our livelihoods day to day. And there were a lot of things they just weren't aware of. They were not aware that trans people were being threatened of being kicked out of the military, which has now occurred. They were not aware that in most of this country, a landlord or a property owner can deny an LGBTQ person housing specifically for being LGBTQ, which is not something that happens to literally any other group in this country. In terms of the legal framework, they were not aware that something like 3/4 of LGBTQ people experience discrimination in healthcare spaces. And we're not talking about little things. We're talking about direct and intentional discrimination when you go to the hospital to get basic medical care. These are not things that I think a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned folks are aware of that we face. I think that there is a chasm of understanding in this country right now with a lot of people who I think believe themselves to be, how do I put this the right way, welcoming and wise, but they're not aware of the vast obstacles that LGBTQ people still face. I would rather not even be having these conversations right now. I think there are so many other issues we could be focused on. We could be focused on veteran homelessness. We could be focused on the fact that there is still a high rate of child hunger in this country. We could be focused on the fact that, there are tens of millions of people with outstanding medical debt in this country because they had to pay $2,000 for an ambulance ride because they had an asthma attack. There are so many issues that affect all of us that I would rather be focused on. But unfortunately, LGBTQ people really don't have that option. We're still trying to fight just for the basic right to not be discriminated against in healthcare, to not be discriminated against in housing, to not go into our workplace and worry about someone finding out that, we are married to someone of the same sex, or that we have a child who's trans and needs a specific gender affirming care. That is a constant weight on our minds. And so if we didn't have to worry about that, maybe there wouldn't be the need for a Pride Month. Maybe we could be focused on these broad economic concerns that everybody is facing, but we don't have that option. We don't. We have to advocate for ourselves because if we don't, no one else will. And, so I try to have these good faith conversations with social conservatives, and many of whom have taken a step back and thought, oh, actually, I wasn't aware of that. I actually wasn't aware of this particular dynamic that LGBTQ people face, because their entire exposure to LGBTQ people might be having, a friend of a friend who's gay, or seeing a gay person on television, or, being aware of Sarah McBride, the first trans member of Congress. But it doesn't extend beyond that. And so it is so critical that we do have these good faith spaces for conversations. I think there's a second component here that's a lot harder, and that's the willingness to be educated. Every single one of us have a combination of privileges and oppressions. Doesn't matter who we are. I'm a trans woman, so, I do experience homophobia and transphobia and misogyny. That's certainly true. but I'm also white. I'm also able-bodied. I'm not a religious minority. I'm a Christian, so I don't, have to worry about Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or, any of those forms of discrimination. So there are a lot of areas where I have considerable privilege, and there are areas where, a white, straight, non-trans man experiences challenges that I don't. And so it's very, I think, difficult for some people to take a step back and realize that if this weren't about identity, if this were just about recognizing specific challenges that we're all facing and holding space and empathy for that, there would be no need for months. There would be no need for, having a Women's History Month or having a Pride Month or what have you. But we're not there yet. And part of the reason we're not there yet is because people are not willing to confront those systemic inequities, whatever they may be, across the board, dealing with different parts of identity. So, if we're willing to have the conversations, if we're willing to engage with those systemic equities in good faith, systemic inequities in good faith, we can move on to bigger things. But until we do that, those of us who are in marginalized communities have to negotiate these aspects of our life that are so stressful, so impactful, and so consistent. Otherwise, we can't.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Again, we're getting to a really powerful conversation. Obviously, I wish we could talk longer, but I don't have as much time to do that. But, um, I'll share a story, which is, you talked about there's an emotional weight. You mentioned the different groups, and all the groups I would say you mentioned are all people who are vulnerable and or marginalized. And I think that, again, there are a lot of people, whether there's the elderly or the disabled or children, and it's definitely complicated because there's a lot of things happening right now where we need to step up and help them. And but again, you're right. I'd love to have a place where we don't have to have, there's no need for the different months that we have, particularly supporting the vulnerable communities. But there's also an emotional weight to it too. And one thing I'll tell you, I did a video last year on LinkedIn. And I talked about what allyship means to me, but I was specifically targeting people who are brown and black Muslims and Christians because I was like, look, from my own brown Christian Muslim experience, right? You can take your values and understand that we've been marginalized too, and you need to take those values of love and compassion and support and kindness and put those towards other groups that need this, because if we're not here for them, who will then speak for us? And I was trying, and what happened was I started getting all these trolls going after me. But the reason I did that though was my point was I chose to do that because I was willing to take on the emotional weight of engaging those people, whether I deleted them or blocked them or actually engage in a conversation. And it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. You both deal with an emotional weight of dealing with this, and I find you're doing it in a very thoughtful, kind manner. Yet at the same time, this happens in other communities too. You'll see very very often the Black community where they're trying to be very kind and courteous and respectful, and we don't have, and we're not, and or if I'm protesting something that's brown or Muslim related, right? We have to be in the time of Gandhi. Only the that kindness, that non-aggressive way would work. It's harder for us to be really angry. I know we're frustrated, but it's harder for us to be angry and to get angry and things like that. And I think that also is unfair. Why do we have to be the ones that are always polite and courteous all the time when we are being oppressed upon and we are the ones? And I'm mostly talking about you, of course. I don't want to make it about me, but I think that to me is a big challenge. So my last question really is about. I mean, I think you were mostly focusing on what can allies do and what can people in the community do, but I guess maybe I'd love to get a tip on what can we. I believe as an ally, I should speak up more. And sometimes my partner's like, "Why do you keep engaging with people on Twitter with all this stuff?" And I was like, "Look, because if I can convince one person to change their mind, because there's a fence, right? And there's people on the other side of the fence. And I'm not trying to talk to people way down in the deep dark woods. I'm trying to talk to people who are on this other side of the fence to have them come back and maybe come over to this side. And it has worked sometimes, and that's why I do it. But I'd love to get your take on what can allies do more in terms of taking action to support Pride and to support the queer community? I'll start with you, Nate.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that I want to address. I mean, I think that the first thing is that no matter who you are and also what your like your understanding of your own safety and your own experiences in the world, there is a place for you to be an ally. And so sometimes it might look like showing up to the protests. If that's the way that you can show up, you can show up with your own body, and that's something that you want to do. But there are so many other ways, and sometimes it can look like, you know, speaking up when somebody says a thing. Sometimes it looks like advocating for policies in your workplace. Sometimes it can look like fundraising for causes or lobbying, you know, against so much of the legislation that's been happening and building stronger coalitions within the spheres of influence that you already have. And so I think that that's what I would say for folks around allyship and how to show up is showing up is the important part, and how you do that can look very different based on who you are, based on who you are in the world. For me, I'm often not the loudest person in the room. It's not really my natural state of being, and so the conversations that I have are often these kind of one-to-one conversations. Yes, I speak to teams and all of that, but it's really focused on helping individuals understand how they can show up for themselves. And so that's really what I would say. There's this vision of allyship that it needs to look one way, and I don't think that's true. I think it can look many different ways, again, based on who we are, based on our communities, and based on our strengths and where we can make the most impact. I would say for folks to be able to leverage whatever you've got, but to do something. Like, the important thing is to do something, no matter what that is. Even if you don't think it's going to be make a huge change, it absolutely does. Even if it changes one person, even if it impacts that one person, that has the opportunity to impact us all.
Thanks, Nate. What do you think, Charlotte?
Yeah, that's well said, Nate. I think history can be a great instructor. And I really hope that more non-LGBTQ people will just be more acquainted with history. I think when you look at the history of civil rights in this country, you see a lot of rhyming, things that come back up again and again, patterns. It's interesting. You look at something like PTSD in the military. So veterans who come back with horrific mental health struggles because of what they've seen or witnessed or been part of. Back in World War I, this was called shell shock. And it was not particularly well received by military leadership, let alone by lawmakers, let alone by the public. So you had World War I veterans coming back to the United States who didn't have that kind of framework of understanding for what they had gone through. They weren't able to hold down jobs. They got divorced from their spouses. They would lose touch with their kids because of these extraordinary mental health problems that they experienced. Then you move up through the century. You get back to the global war on terror 67 years later, and you have a better understanding of PTSD. But then, it's not exactly perfect, right? It's a constant form of education. And so the reason I'm saying this is because our understanding of the challenges that people face, whatever vulnerable community it may be, evolves over time. And I would like to believe it evolves in good faith. Would the average citizen of the United States back in 1919, 1920 have really understood shell shock, as it was called back then? Would they have really understood what it means for a soldier to experience horrific things and then negotiate that through medical treatment and therapy and what have you? No, certainly not. They wouldn't have understood it. Nowadays, the average person in this country does have at least a baseline understanding of PTSD. So when you apply this to the LGBTQ community, and really any vulnerable community that still faces extraordinary consequences and challenges, you find that there's still a lack of education and awareness. When people quote Dr. King from a socially conservative standpoint, I always find that very curious. I do. They'll say, it's not about the content. It's about, excuse me, it's about the content of your character, not the color of your skin, from his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And I always find that interesting because in his time, Dr. King, who is now thought of quite rightly as a prophet of peace, of understanding, of empathy, he was reviled in his time. Most Americans did not support Dr. King based on polling. We have actual evidence that, at near the end of his life in the United States, Dr. King, most of the country did not support his objectives and did not have a popular view of him. And then he was assassinated. He was literally killed despite his message of nonviolence. There is a deep incongruency between how people tend to perceive, how social conservatives tend to perceive Dr. King and how he was actually treated in his time. And the reason this is important is it comes back to this debate over respectability politics. It comes back to this debate over how someone is asked to rationally advocate for their own rights. And the thesis seems to be, you should be nice all the time. You should never raise your voice. You should never get frustrated. You should always, always, always allow for infinite mistakes, even if they're intentional, from people who do engage in bigotry and do engage in prejudice and discrimination. And yet, when you point out the assassinations of Dr. King, of Harvey Milk, of Malcolm X, for that matter, of all these civil rights leaders, it's frustrating to be told to be nicer. And I think I'm a fairly nice person, told to be nicer when we have a long history in this country of nice people in these civil rights movements being harmed and even killed. So what I would like for folks to at least try to embrace is the concept that, maybe it goes both ways. Maybe you should try to be nicer. Maybe you should try to be more empathetic. Maybe you should take a step back and realize that, actually, it seems pretty stressful being an LGBTQ person. It seems pretty stressful to be a Black person in this country. It seems pretty stressful to be a woman in this country. Maybe as much as I am demanding patience and understanding from marginalized people, maybe I should exercise that too. Maybe it should be reciprocal. And for some reason, when you point this out, that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. They're not so uncomfortable asking for that patience and kindness. They are very uncomfortable being asked to be kind and patient. So just something to think about. Food for thought.
Right. Listen, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And in case you didn't know, everyone, if you want to check out the TLB Club, we do weekly Zoom master classes for people. You can come by and meet me, meet the other guest expert speakers. You can see what we're all about. I'm a big believer in inclusivity and learning and growing in education and support and things like that. So I hope you will check that out. And would love to get some final thoughts on this conversation, and also maybe you can let people. I encourage everyone here. Make sure you follow Charlotte and Nate, and of course, if you can look up Claude Sliver, who couldn't come today because she was sick, please feel free to follow her as well. Make sure you follow them and follow their social channels. But I'd love for a final thought, and also to let people know where they can follow you and support you in terms of your work. So I'll start with you, Charlotte, and then we'll go to Nate.
I can't wait to hear Nate's final thoughts, so I'll keep this brief. I would just meet more LGBTQ people if I were you. If you're watching this and you're just uncertain about Pride Month and LGBTQ rights, and you're maybe confused or intimidated, I promise you, there are so many LGBTQ spaces where you would be welcome with open arms, regardless of who you are, straight or not straight, trans or not trans. We want you in our spaces. We do. But we want you in our spaces in good faith. You know, you don't have to know everything. You can make mistakes. As long as you approach with an open heart, as long as you approach wanting to understand us better and wanting us to understand you better, that's all you need. But you got to try. You got to put forth a little effort. You got to, you know, at least, you know, take steps toward learning and wanting to get to know LGBTQ people. And how can you do that if you don't have LGBTQ people in your life? So that's what I would encourage. I would encourage people watching this to just try to get to know more LGBTQ folks. Just try, make the effort. I promise it's worth it.
Thanks, Charlotte. Nate?
Yeah, thank you so much for that and for this conversation. And I just was able to see some of the comments, and so I'm trying to think about what a final thought would be based on kind of what I'm seeing some of the comments have been. I think that folks often think that LGBTQ identities are very complicated because of all of the letters and all of that, but they're not, right? We often have an experience or a conversation or something that allows us to understand ourselves better, and then we try to find the word and label to match it. And if there are no words or labels that match it, then we make up our own. We create something new entirely. But we're really trying to capture the kind of messy understandings of who we are as humans. And that's true for LGBTQ people, but it's true for all of us. We've all got a gender. We've all got a sexuality. You know, if I asked folks what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman based on your understanding, I would get a different answer from every single person. And so when we're talking about LGBTQ communities, we're talking about gender and sexuality and just how we're able to be in the world. And so, you know, something like allyship, thinking about a name change, it helps me as a trans person change my name at work, but it's also going to help somebody who just got married and wants their name changed. Or having a flexible dress code, you know, women wearing pants in the workplace, right? In some ways, that's when we're talking about gender expression and how we're showing up. There are expansive ways that LGBTQ communities think about it that also benefit us all. And so I think this idea of it's not there's like an othering that can happen, and so as much as I think we can close that gap, I would encourage folks, as Charlotte was saying, like meet folks, read things. If you don't think you have access to folks, you most likely you most likely do. But if you don't, then actively seek out creators, actively seek out the resources to find it, and find the ways to show up for you in the ways that feel right. Again, I think really we can feel stuck because it can feel very big. There are so many big things happening all the time, and that's true. There are. It's just kind of the state of the world that we're in right now. But doing something in your community, even if it's only for yourself, and it's unlearning some of the things that you need to learn, is a form of allyship and is a form of will actually make change. And so that's really, I think, the main takeaway is no matter where you are, no matter what influence you have, to do, it can feel small, but it is absolutely not small, and it can help to start to shift some of these larger things. So maybe next Pride we can have a different conversation entirely, and I want a future where we don't have to focus on this, where we can focus on and you know, anything else. So I would say doing something and then creating that vision for the future that we want, being able to envision what it might look like for us to show up next Pride and be able to, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like talk about, you know, books, whatever it is, but thinking about what that might mean for us and for our daily lives.
Thank you so much for this. I mean, I think my final message is, look, it's important for us to, I like what Charlotte said, build relationships with people. And a lot of people talk about, I have one queer friend. Like, have several friends, invite them, talk to them, and see what their different opinions are on things. I think that's incredibly important. I think it's important to speak up. I think it's important to have conversations, which is exactly why I'm doing this live stream, because I think it's important. And I don't think that, I don't want to have this live stream, but I'm doing it because it's so important to have those conversations. I'm a big believer in thought leadership, which means driving conversation forward and educating people. And I think people need to take those steps. So as speaking as an ally to other allies out there who are watching, listen to understand, not listen to refute. Try to understand them, include them in your conversations, and do your best to educate yourself with the right sources and the right people and not just share our own stuff. And I think that just by doing that and having those conversations, we'll get to a much better place. So thank you so much for being here. And all of you can certainly comment on this live stream even after it's done. You can again follow Charlotte and Nate as well as myself at the TLB Club and see what we're up to. And I want to thank you again for being here. Thank you both for taking your time on a Sunday. Happy Pride, and I'm looking forward to Pride. We have Pride weekend in Toronto next week, so looking forward to that. It's going to be a big celebration. So thank you all, and see you guys later. Take care.
Happy Pride.
End the stream in 3, 2, 1.